Another episode of Digital Video Synthesis Systems. This episode we are going to do a couple of fun techniques in video waves. I'm just going to dive right in and assume that if people are here, they're here, and that you've already got video waves set up. So what video waves is it's a software that I designed, which I basically wanted to have it sort of duplicate some of the functionality of like SD analog video signal mixers, just in terms of being able to grab a couple of video signals in, mix them, do crazy things to the color space, and then do internal feedback with them. So you can see what's happening right now, like around like the edges of like where my head and my hands are, this is called video feedback. And how it is done is it's grabbing a delayed copy of the incoming signal and then just sort of like keying it in with the original signal. And because it's in a feedback loop, everything that's captured in it just sort of gets like thrown in there, and then like I'm doing a slight displacement. So we can see over here we have the control panel for video waves. So I'm not going to do the whole, there's other videos I have where I go through like the full like control thing and this is what's that and everything. So I'm not going to do the full video waves intro. This is more of a techniques focused kind of thing. So we're just going to dive right into it, and let's just go into FB0 right here. Open this up and we can see that I've got this key value up to 211. If I turn the key value down, then nothing comes through. And then if I turn it up, then more and more of the live video is getting keyed out and replaced with the feedback. And the feedback you can see is moving, so bad with the mirror thing, it's moving this way. And you look down here where it says FBOX, you can see everything else is where it normally should be, and FBX is just off a little bit. So if I turn this back to 0, then we see the feedback doesn't move at all. If I do this kind of thing, it just sort of stays frozen in there. So when I was developing this, I didn't just want to duplicate what you could do in a video mixer, like an analog video mixer, but just kind of like take the basic concept and then just like amplify it. So in a video mixer, you can only really ever grab like the previous frame, and that's just by plugging the output into the input. And that's how you would do this kind of a stuff. If you wanted to send, and if you're using like an analog signal video mixer, it's always going to kind of do something like this, where it's like a little bit X and Y displaced, and it'll be constantly moving a bit. Only in digital video, like digital signal video mixers, where you can like just like do frame buffer swaps like you're doing here, can you get the completely static feedback thing. But because I was able to do this on software, I could change the amount of delay time we have. So you look up here where it says delay amount, and you can see if I slow this down to like 10, this is 10 frames. So this means what's getting keyed into the back is 10 frames back. So I'm not going to go too much more into this right now, but we'll come back to this in a bit, and I'll show you what sort of interesting things you can do with the extra long delays and feedback. Yeah, let's just go back to here. So if you've been following along with the previous episodes where I went into Hydra and vSynth, you'll know the two basic things that you want to do when you're doing digital video feedback is you want to change something in the geometrical space, and you can see I'm doing that here where I've got X and Y displaced, and you want to change something about the color space. So video waves is kind of unique in compared to Hydra or vSynth in that it's designed pretty much mainly for working with video feedback. So you don't have oscillators, you don't have any kind of like, you don't really have the modular like flow thing. It's not like live coding. This is a pretty much like a fixed pipeline. Hey, what's happening? It's a very fixed kind of thing, and it's just really just to do one thing well, and that's video feedback. which seems like it might be kind of limiting. In some ways it is, but in some ways it's just a fundamentally different approach to doing things, because you can do stuff in here that you can't really do very well in Hydra or vSynth, because the kind of things that work really well in video feedback don't really work that well in standard synthesis systems, and vice versa. Like, you have to do these really, really tiny shifts when you're doing video feedback. And it would make no sense to have that if you're like not doing feedback with the things. Like if you have an oscillator or a shape and you just kind of want to like repeat it and move it around a little bit, it doesn't make sense to like shift it by like 0.001. Whereas in video feedback, you want to be doing everything like the tiniest amounts, and that's how you get like the best things going on. But yeah, so one of the really nifty things you can do in this zone is have a lot of control over some really esoteric color space things. So we've got these controls right here: FBO HuX mod, FBO HuX offset, FBO HuX LFO. I'm fully aware that these are confusing and obscure descriptions for things, as are many of the descriptions I use for the stuff I design. It's because I'm sort of making these things up. There's not really like an established language for working with this stuff, because it's just stuff that I've sort of am the only person who's really like dug into it and like developed this sort of thing. So, you know, to a certain extent, you just pick something and go with it. Like, I would be totally up for suggestions on improving the like terminology I guess I use here, but you know, it kind of is what it is. It's just like, if I actually told you what was going on here, it would not actually be that much more helpful, I think. I'm using an application of the logistic map to play with hue in really unpredictable ways. But yeah, so you can see, so if I'm just doing this, then it's just grabbing whatever the color is on the edge and then just sliding it over. And you can see as soon as I move this offset over a bit, it starts to do some strobing things. And you can see as I move my head over how it's like changing the color pretty like radically between frames, but we're losing saturation in here. And this has to do with color space conversions that are happening. So if I want to see a little bit more of what's going on in the feedback color patterns, I'm going to have to turn up the saturation a bit. Luckily, I have the way to do that right here. So we can see, if I turn up the saturation, then we can see more of the color. Strangely enough, we start to lose the brightness. This is also because of like really wonky color space things that are going on. So I'm also going to turn up the brightness a little bit. There we go. And let me key some things out a little bit more. Alright, so now here we are in full-on crazy psychedelic mode. So you can use this HuX offset. If you use this just a tiny amount, then you'll see a pattern that's very, very similar to what will happen if you take like an Adderall or a Videonics or a Panasonic video mixer and plug the output into the input, where it's doing this sort of like reaction diffusion, and we've got all these little like coral reef, like tropical fish patterns happening here. And you can see that the color scheme is pretty much, it's not quite a full rainbow, it's more or less just like red, green, blue. Like it's cycling through red, green, and blue. So one of the things that I wanted to give options for in video waves that you can't really do in hardware mixers is to have different sort of color space patterns happening for different reaction diffusion. So in the long and short, that's what these three controls here are for. So I'm just going to like play around with these a little bit and sort of show y'all why these exist and what they're here for. So you can see I turn the offset up a bit, and then I'm going to start to play with LFO. You can see as I increase it, certain things start to speed up. Kind of gets a little grainier too. And then at a certain point, it sort of like goes into crazy noise, and we start losing saturation, and the brightness is maxing out. If I want to sort of capture a little bit more of the patterns that are happening here, because this is a totally digital video synthesis system, it's happening on like a pixel by pixel basis. So a lot of the things are just happening that are too sort of fine for like human eyes to really discern. So if we just blur this up a little bit, and then another thing I can do is take another one of these frame buffers. So FP0, FP1, FP2, and FP3 are all separate delay lines that you can mix in. So if I take this one and mix it in, and let me turn up the saturation on this one a bit too. We're losing it. I'm going to need to go up here and just crank up the saturation fully. There we go. And then we'll be able to see more of the patterns that are happening. You can see, as I play around with the LFO value, we get different sort of color space things happening, and the color will sort of come in and out because of, long story short, because of chaos. And if I turn it down, then we get another sort of thing where we get thicker lines, we get these sort of like weird little spaces where there's like larger shapes coming in and out. And you can see as I move around too, that'll trap everything in there as well. And the auto exposure on the camera is definitely helping out a lot. Definitely feel free to ask me any questions if you are confused about what's happening. Yeah. So, you notice that I haven't even like changed the hue value over here too. We can do a lot of crazy stuff just by using these three controls and tweaking around the saturation and the brightness. So as I take this down, you can see we get this sort of more monochrome thing happening where there's just like these fun little trails that happen. And now here is the point where I'm going to start to play around with the delay amount. So let me take this just down to like 3 frames back. And you can see those little trails that I was playing with earlier, it takes them longer to form. And we get that really nice sort of like smooth hue shifting thing happening. And then as I change the hue LFO values, see as we come back over here, we're getting sort of the same patterns happening, but they're taking longer to form. So it's less strobing that's going on and more sort of like smooth, slow, oozing pattern things happening. Now that I have these two, I've got hue offset and hue LFO. Well, let me try some stronger things with hue offset. So you can see as I increase this, it's even though we've got a delay amount of 3, if I keep going up with this, it's going to speed things up. And it's going to make the pattern sort of finer. And then we find this one crazy sweet spot right here. So just to let you know, I didn't like plan out. I don't know these exact numbers that I'm doing here. All I'm really doing is just trying different settings one into another. And honestly, every time I do that with these 3 combinations of things, I find something new. Because there's just sort of like an entire universe of like crazy things you can do with just these 3 on their own. So now I've got this really nice warm oozing pattern thing happening. And then what happens if I start to change FBO hue X mod? Let's just take this down a bit and sort of see what happens. You can see we get to this one point where there's just like weird topographical things happening. And then as I go down to another certain amount, it's like freezing things. And you can see it's combining with the auto exposure to do some pretty awesome stuff. Let me just take this down to maybe 5. So let's try hue X5 and then let's try some different combos over here. So we take offset down a bit. And now you can see instead of like the RGB kind of like things that were happening, we're getting this weird digital crunchy like pink and orange patterns happening. As I change the LFO values. And then it sort of changes like how the sort of like, what do you even say? Like the range, the total range of the color is changing as well. So that's pretty nifty. If you want to see the color patterns but you don't want this full saturation, something interesting you can do is you can do the saturation invert. And it'll strobe a little bit at first. Wow. It'll keep strobing for a while, I guess. You do it like that. Oh, wow. So see, this is what happens. If I turn the delay down to here, we get that. I turn saturation invert off. Yeah, this is video waves. Wow, I turned saturation off and it just disappeared. What if we turn this back up to 3? See, now we're getting these patterns again. So this is sort of what I was saying about this being a really, like, a very chaotic system, is that changing any one thing out of any of these will just, like, totally hardcore change everything that's going on. But yeah, this is pretty nifty right now. If I take offset up a bunch more, I kind of like this sort of mode you can get into where it sort of freezes things and you get these like standing waves like curling around and interacting with one another. So another neat thing you can do, once you have something kind of neat going on over here, you can see as I did earlier I have FB3 mixed in. Now I'm going to mix this in a little bit more. So I'm just going to use this frame buffer, FB3, as sort of like a filter to smooth things out. And then if I just turn up saturation and brightness on this one a bit too, that'll add to the sort of like filtering quality of everything. So if I go over to FB1 and I just mix it in a negative amount, let's see what happens as I start to do this. Let me try to do this slowly. So we can sort of really, really isolate and analyze what is happening. Alright, so that's pretty crazy. So we're getting this really glitchy, stuttery thing happening over here. And then what happens if I turn the delay amount down over here? Okie dokie. And we can turn this FB1 mix down a strong amount. So we're getting sort of a bit of like a cancellation, like it's can work sort of like a sharpening kind of thing or an enhancement thing. Then another thing I can do over here is while I have this mix in a negative, let me change the X and Y positions a bit on this one. And now you can see just immediately we got another sort of crazy pattern happening. I kind of want to make this maybe a little bit smaller. So maybe we'll take that down to like 42, and this one like that. There we go. So I've got this mixed in negative. Got this one just keyed in. So what happens if I also start to mix this one in positive? As you can see, as the mix value of this gets larger, then it sort of starts to overlay and like I start to dissolve out of everything. Another nifty thing you can do is like do a negative mix in. Well, it's doing double negatives right now, so that's where it gets kind of nutso. Let me turn this one off for the moment, and let's just see what happens if we do this negative mix. There we go. So this is something I've been exploring a lot lately. I've been working a lot on the CV expansion board. Howdy. The distinction between FB0, 1, 2, and 3 is just simply like the pipeline. So it's the order in which they get mixed in. Because they're all being, you can all luma key and mix one in with one another. But the way it starts is channel 1 is sort of your first channel, and if you luma key 2 into 1, like they're layered up like Photoshop layers, where channel 1 is at the top, and then channel 1 will be behind that. FB0 will be behind that. 1, 2, and 3 will all be behind that. So otherwise, other than that, they're all completely identical, and you can sort of individually control like where they are at. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this specific mode is one I've been working on a lot. If you've been looking at my Instagram in the last 24 hours, I probably posted a good, like, 20 videos or so of, like, this kind of a thing where I've been doing, you can see I've got FB0 mixed in pretty strongly negative, and I'm messing around with these 3 chaos things. Yeah, something else to mention is that if you're unaware, I have a Raspberry Pi-based version of this called the Wave Pool. You can't do everything you can do on video waves on the Wave Pool, but you can do a bunch of things that you can. So, but this specific mode you definitely can, and I've been playing around with it a lot. So look at all like the crazy different patterns that are happening all around here. It's mixing around with the auto exposure on this camera really well. And then let's see what happens if I add a little bit more delay going on in here. So you're kind of limited in this specific kind of mode as to how much delay you can add in, because when you're doing negative, any kind of inversion, so this isn't, it's not quite like subtractive blending, but it's close enough. It works in a very similar way. When you do this kind of subtractive or negative blending and feedback and you change the delay amount, you can get some really weird strobing things happening. But at this point, I think we have some really beautiful things happening. I'm also in the process of putting together a list of things that I'm going to add to the next update of Video Waves, which will maybe happen in August or September. So if you have any recommendations or want to see anything in that, this is a great time to bring that up too. Sorry, I'm just getting distracted by this specific mode here. But yeah, one thing I'm definitely going to put into the next one. Hey, what's happening? Is I'm going to make sure you can automate the key value. Because I added LFOs for everything on this except for key value, and I've realized since then that automating the key in and out is a really, really amazing thing to play with. But yeah, let's just keep this right about at 0.3 or so. Because kind of the best thing about this like negative mix chaotic hue zone is these sort of like patterns that happen in between here. And I think I'm going to go in and I'm going to add some more blur as well, because I want to see these patterns a little bit stronger. I kind of have a feeling that they're not quite going to make it. They might get sort of compressed and not make it through the streaming zones. I'm not sure though. Twitch is pretty good quality for video. You can see down here in global we have some controls where you can just do like a composite blur on everything and a composite sharpen. I don't even think, maybe I'll try a tiny bit of sharpen. But once you start adding playing with blur and sharpen on this, that turns it into a completely different zone. It's pretty crazy, and I could probably focus an entire episode just on that. Yeah, just do like a teensy amount. There we go. Alright, so now that we have this kind of really fun thing set up, I'm curious as to how much delay we can go here and still have like visible feedback. So you can see, if you've been watching for this whole time, you can see when we started out and I showed you can go like delay back like several frames. You didn't really see feedback, you saw like looping activity. And you're kind of seeing the same thing now, but it's very, very distorted. So we're not really getting the video feedback now in the same way. A lot of it is sort of like, this stuff in the background is still happening, but you can see everywhere where I'm moving is kind of, oh wow, check out what's happening with my hand over here. They're combining in really interesting ways. And then if I go back here and I just speed this up, we can see it's something completely different. So delay time definitely has a very, very strong strong effect on how the reaction diffusion patterns that you get. I think really right about 3 frames, between like 3 and maybe like 7, seems to be like a real sweet spot for this kind of a mode. Let's keep it right at 3. And then, so now that we're locked in here pretty well, let's see what happens when I start to change the hue mod. So overall, what hue mod does is sort of set a total palette. So if you have this down to basically like 0, well, that's pretty weird. Because I'm at, oh, that's because hue offset is so large right now. We turn this down to like 0. Turn this down to 0. So HueX mod should turn the total palette down. It's not because we're mixing it in with the other one as well. But you can see we've got sort of like almost an inverted palette of where we were at before. And the reaction diffusion is sort of happening in the inverted mix stuff. If I turn this down, you can see we're getting some stuff happening, not really too much in the keyed out stuff. It's pretty much slowed down to nothing. So the main reaction diffusion that's happening with HueX mod turned down is all in the inverted mix stuff. Okay. Honestly, I learn new things about this system every time I really dig into it. And then you can see, so let's key some more stuff out here so you can see more of what's going on in the background, and then we'll just have sort of the inverted mix on my face here. So you can see it's just kind of freezing whatever is happening here and doing like a 2-dimensional slit scan thing of the feedback. Then, if I start to bring this up a bit, so right about here, we get this sort of like, we've only got 2 colors really. We've got this sort of like pale blue and the red. And there's not really anything else happening in the feedback zone. But then, you can see I start to add some offsets in there, and we get these kind of like, almost like monochromatic patterns happening. But sort of no matter how much I turn these up and down, we don't get like a full color spectrum thing happening, if that makes sense. So the lower that HueX mod is, the less total color you have to work with. And then you can see as if I bring it up to like 2 or so, and then I start to play with these, we get a little bit more color going on. So it's going from like dark blue to pale blue and back and forth. I play around with the LFO thing. It's changing the speed and it's changing the patterns. So there is not a save settings for this. Because, so let's say that I saved all of these settings exactly the way they were right now, and then I stopped, closed the program down, and then I came back to it and I loaded up the settings again, we wouldn't be back in the same spot. Because that's just not how, like, sometimes it would work out well, but most of the times what you would end up with is just sort of nothing happening or something completely different happening. Because this is a nonlinear system which is built off of, like, essentially like chaos theory. One of the basic tenets of chaos theory is that you don't get to, like, save your settings and start over and go at the same place. So a large part of video waves, which I think people find pretty frustrating and I find really interesting, is that you sort of have to like maneuver your way from one place to the other. That the act of going, yes, it does. It exactly, like you have to go from A to B to C to get to D. You can't ever just hop over to D. Sometimes you can, but in this kind of a system, it just doesn't work out that way. So. But yeah, so I was talking about colors, how the colors move around. You can see as I start to increase FBO hue mod, then we get more and more colors happening in the background. So now we've got yellow and blue. And if I bring this up to like 6, and then we're getting these kind of the yellow-blue hue cycle things. And then I can start adding hue X offset up and down, play around with these, and we start getting a lot more things happening. Well, it's not like we weren't having things happening before, it was just we had a limited color range. But yeah, so if you're ever sick of rainbow zones, because if you turn this all the way up, you're going to be having a lot of rainbows happening all over the place. You can turn this one down, and then you start to get into more monochromatic kind of things. And I'm going to have to go get a glass of water, and I will be right back. Hello, I'm back. Oh yeah, and I want to make sure I mentioned before this ends that on Sunday, this Sunday at 9 p.m., I'll be doing a full live stream remix of Ghost in the Shell using Wave Pool, and also doing some stuff on the audio too. So yeah, if you wanna check that out, that'll be happening. I don't think I'll be able to save it because of copyright things, so it'll be live only. Time zone, I am on the East Coast, so 9 p.m. EDT. Yeah, so this is the main focus of things I wanted to get into during this thing. Heck yeah. So if anyone has any questions, now's a great time to throw out some questions. Otherwise, I'm going to sort of start over from a different area. But yeah, this is the chaotic hue and doing different sort of hue patterns with video waves. Alright, so some other really nifty things I like to play around with in here is, let's kind of slow this down a little bit, but not too much. So something I like a lot is, so when you play around with this zooming in and out, let me turn off the toroid thing for the moment. So, if you play around with this zoom thing that happens, you can zoom really, really close in. And you can see the more you zoom, you get this kind of like rasterizing thing. It amplifies the pixeliness of everything that happens. As I move around, let's add something so I don't have to keep bobbing my head around. Let me just go over here and add this tetrahedron for a bit. So there we go. Let's just pull me out for the moment. Alright, so tetrahedron only. You can see as we're zoomed in a lot, it's amplifying this sort of rasterization thing that's happening. And because this looks like a straight line to us, but it's really just like a grid of pixels. So as it rotates, the pixeliness of it gets amplified, and we can see that happening over here. So some pretty fun things you can do with this sort of rasterization thing is, first off, I can automate the Z movement. If I go into the LFOs here, see down here where it's Z displace, I can start to change the amp and the rate of the modulation. And I might need to dial in the original thing a little bit differently. Yeah, maybe I want it to be a little bit faster. Speed it up. And I think I want it to be a little bit brighter too. Why are we so dark? How did this get so dark? Because I'm sharpening a little bit? Probably. Oh, it's because this is slow. Let me speed this up. There we go. That's what's going on. And let me add a bit more saturation here. Oh, we're maxed out on saturation. Where can I get some more saturation? Maybe over here? Yeah, there we go. Turn the sharpen off completely, actually. So the thing about the sharpen algorithm that I have on here is it tends to bring out the brightness. So it can be really finicky as to like how it sort of affects the global brightness of everything. That's why I added this boost over here, but it's a little funky to try to play around with this boost. So fixing that thing up is on my list for the next thing as well. Alright, so we got this kind of set up pretty well. We just pull out FB3 just for the moment so we can just see the 1. Now here we can kind of see what sort of happens when there's like this rasterization feedback is just like the different sort of sizes of the pixels and the way that they're like rotating. Let me turn off the strobing. Sorry about that. Boop. Let me change the hue slightly so we get something going on. There we go. You can kind of see that it's just basically, this is doing like, when it's like this, we're getting these sort of moire effects off of the pixels. But as we get larger and larger, then you get like the actual sort of trying to get the right threshold here where it's not super painful, but you can see what I'm talking about. There's a bit of it. There we go. What if I just turn this down a little bit? There we go. So we can slow it down so we can kind of see what's happening. So a lot of these patterns are really just happening. They're doing the amplification of the raster being as we zoom in, and because we're changing the zoom in and out. And let me come on back here and add FB0 mix back in, and then smooth that whole thing out. And we're getting these, we'll get these large pulsing waves coming in and out. Word. Awesome. And if I turn the blur all the way off, then we get some weird graininess things happening. And you can kind of see it throbbing a bit more. And then as I add the blur back in. So a large part of video waves is just sort of like doing like these tiny tweaks to everything and seeing how radically different. Not every mode you get into will be like amazing off the bat, but there's just like a combinatorically like immense amount of different styles of like video feedback you can get into here. And it's hard to like find them. It's hard to like list them all. You just kind of have to like play around with and spend the time to like discover them. Add in a bit of this sharpen. Heck yeah. Oh yeah, I'm not sure if I mentioned this already, but I'm going to keep on doing video synthesis tutorials like this on a semi-regular basis, I think throughout August, starting next week and then throughout August. I'll keep doing them. They'll be on Tuesday nights instead of Wednesday nights. And then I'll keep sort of doing like a revolving door. Yeah. It's theoretically possible. It would probably take me about like 2 or 3 weeks to actually make it happen in a way that anyone other than me could do it. So I'm probably not going to do that unless people want to like crowdsource and like toss me some cash to like do that. But yeah, people keep asking and I keep saying, yeah, if y'all want to crowdsource it, I'll do it. But otherwise, it's, you know, not really. Audio reactivity isn't kind of something I prioritize in video synthesis because, I don't know, I find it to be, personally, I just don't have an interest in it. So, but yeah, the easiest way to do audio reactivity with something like this is just pick up the auto wave. So I mentioned the wave pool earlier. Wave pool is the little Raspberry Pi based like hardware handheld sized version of video waves. There is a fully audio reactive version of wave pool that you can pick up from my store or build for yourself if you check out my website. So that's a pretty handy shortcut to this kind of a thing. Totally distracted by what I was doing here. Oh yeah, I'm playing around with this sort of raster stuff. Somebody is knocking at my door, so I have to go check that out. 1 second. Log out. Log out. Sorry, I figured out. Yellow! Alright, so what was I doing here? Just goofing around with things? Oh yeah, so let's play around with these hue offset values some more, just while we're in this like kind of sweet spot of like raster things. Actually, as far as I can tell, I think I have something figured out where I can get orders shipped out in under 4 weeks, generally speaking. I'm pretty much all caught up on things, so I'm not behind on anything right now, and I am pretty sure I'm going to get every single order I've had out before the end of, every order I have up until this date I should have out by the end of July, first week of August or so. So, yeah, I think I found some pretty decent sources for things locally. The only thing is like the audio reactive bits I still have to get from Europe, but they seem to be coming through okay. It's just like the usual like USPS things. They're even if it's shipped locally, they seem to still lose them like 1/3 of the time. But But yeah, I think shipping has sort of chilled out for a bit, although I really can't make any 100% promises for the future because you just look at the pandemic curve and realize that this is definitely going to affect some things that we take for granted. If I slow this down a little bit more. There we go. So you can really watch the like raster thing sort of pulse in and out here if I slow it down to like 4. Yeah, I mean, I do my best, but yeah, I just got to be honest. Like, I don't get to control everything that happens, but so far I have. I'm pretty confident I'm getting all the orders that are in out pretty soon, so that's awesome. Oh, here we go. Here's some nice amiibos. If I also go into here, let's turn the amplification of the Z displacement all the way up. And grab a different source for this. So, at a certain point when I start to get tired of the Tetrahedron, so I set up a Siphon Source. So let's grab Siphon in. Let's turn the bright up over here. And then I have a video I recorded the other day of, I have a video recorded on here actually. It was a live stream using the Phosphorm. Let me get rid of the Tetrahedron right now. So, if you want to just see, let's just take a look at what the video is without any feedback on it. So, there it is right there. I would like to make this, let's see if I can get this sort of, I guess I can't really get it scaled up to center. I should have edited some things a little bit better. We can just start like this. So, here's the video I got. It's going to take a second to start moving. There we go. So this is video of me playing with the Phosphorm. And see if I can turn some of these things back down to a more like non-insane mode here. And then I'll start to key stuff in. So you can see, I've got the delay down to a really slow amount. No, there isn't. I'll probably put that into the next version, though. You can see if we just do it like this, we get this kind of... So, what I kind of want to shoot for here is you can see how we get this kind of a thing happening, where it's sort of like not quite full like video feedback like reaction diffusion patterns, but just like a little bit of like hue shifting, and then go sort of back and forth from that and the non-color change. So I'm going to try to keep this maybe like right here, and then when we go into the hue, go into the LFOs, go down to hue, let me take this rate, bring it out to like 4, and then take amp. Let me start to dial amp in and out. There we go. So, this is just a nice way to get... So a lot of the other hue shifting things, if you turn them on they'll just go full-on bonkers all of the time. So if you just want some really subtle things, it's better to use just these, like, the LFOs over here. And just use the hue LFOs just a little bit. You can see if I turn the amplification up too much on this, then we'll start to get into the more, like, psychedelic zones. We go, like, all the way up, then we get, yep, there we go. There's some psychedelic things happening. But if I just want some more subtle things going on, we can keep it right here. Yeah, that's nice. And then I can play around with the sharpen a little bit. So you can see, you can kind of use the sharpen darkness thing to your advantage sometimes. Let me add the boost in a little bit more. So this is definitely sort of like the most like camera feedback sort of thing you can get. Not the most, but the most that I've done in this session here. So this is the most thing that would look at if you just like use this as like a keying video mixer, like CRT camera feedback thing happening here. And you can see I've got kind of just enough automation going on where it's just kind of like active and moving all of the time. So I don't have to be clicking on things all over the dang place. Let me add a little bit more automation. Let me try some Y and Z displacement things going on, just kind of subtly. And then I'm going to wrap up at 9 p.m. But I hope to see all of y'all's back here Sunday night when I'm doing Ghost in the Shell, and then next Tuesday night I'll be back here showing some techniques in Hydra as well. But yeah, any more questions or suggestions for the next video waves? Def hit me up in the next 5 minutes or so. Otherwise, I'm just going to do some mild tweaks to this really, really soothing thing I've got going on right now. Try a little bit of rotation. And you can see we've got Z-displace rate and Z-displace amp all the way up like this. If I just go over here and change the sort of like pivot point, then we'll get some different things happening. But yeah, here's like a shortcut to audio reactivity. As long as you have an oscilloscope around, you can always just do this kind of audio reactivity. I don't know if the audio file is playing through here. The build specs haven't changed at all since this whole thing got put together. So, yeah. No reason to. I'm using the Raspberry Pi 3B and like old versions of everything just to like make sure that it's like stable as heck. Let's add some more sharpens in here. Alright. Let me try to keep the boost just at the right spot here. And then let me go up here and modulate the brightness a bit. grab frame buffer 1 down here, and let's key this one in. So what I want to do is key this into the dark parts that frame buffer 0 isn't working on. So you can kind of see that up on the corner here. And let's modulate Z on this one as well. And you can see this one has toroidal universe on. Let me just turn that off. The goal here, what I'm finishing up is to try to do some slightly more subtle things with video waves. Usually, I think when you see me playing with this, it's like just like full-on face melting, like 5 tabs of acid kind of deal, and just kind of want to maybe go for like a half tab of acid sort of feeling. But yeah, it's actually a little trickier to be subtle in video waves than it is to be like all out nutso. But I think that's what people are looking for in general, is like just the sort of tips on how to do more nuanced things, I think. I mean, I don't really know. I'm going to do a little bit of hue modulation on this one as well. Another thing you can do is modulate delay time. Let me try a little bit of delay modulation over here. And let's modulate the delay. For this GUI, they kind of always have to be sliders as far as I can tell. I just really haven't had a chance to dig much into video waves since the last update, and the big thing about the last update was the new GUI. So, but yeah, you can MIDI map things. If you check on the GitHub README, there's MIDI CCs hard-coded for a bunch of these things already. So that's sort of the most pleasant way to interact with this. Although there's just so many gosh dang parameters in here that you just kind of have to pick and choose which ones you want to map. But yeah, MIDI is definitely the way to go. What was I going to do up here? Delay time. Mobile randomizer? Yeah, I could probably toss one of those in too. I'm going to do the hard reset. It wouldn't really be any more difficult to throw in like a 4 randomizer. Randomizers are pretty easy to do overall. The tricky thing is to make a randomizer that just doesn't like totally like there's sort of like there's randomizers and then there's like intelligent randomizers, you know? Like if you ever play around with like Melda VST plugins, it seems like a lot of their stuff is just like randomly generated, but most of it is not useful in any way whatsoever. So there's sort of like, how do you make something random but make it so it's sort of like, yes, exactly. You need to define basically these sort of neighborhoods. But then the thing that you get into after that is the neighborhoods are like contingent on one another. But I don't know. I'll just throw in like a global randomizer and see where it goes from there. You know, always start out. It's important just to like try something and start it out and see where that happens. Yeah, maybe instead of a randomizer, like a permutation where you just start from a spot and then you just hit a button and it just kind of like throws things off, like tweaks them a little bit. So instead of having to go in and tweak like 20 different things, you just hit the button and it tweaks like everything that you've moved already, it just tweaks them a tiny bit. And then maybe randomly selects one or two other things. Yeah. Yeah, that seems like a fun idea. Yeah, that kind of seems essentially what I'm talking about, where you just sort of like have like a more nuanced, not a randomizer, but yeah, an inspirationalizer. So I wonder what happens with these current settings if I go in and I turn off all these zooming things that are happening. So let me just turn down amp all the way down here. Turn the amp all the way down here. That's pretty cool. That's not what I expected to happen. I expected something else to happen. But Alright, I'm going to have to wrap up now. Thanks a lot for stopping by. And see you next time around. Yeah, have fun.